So, ladies and gentlemen, today on Sports File, it's a two-part series we're doing on some of the bad trades by the Vancouver Canucks during the 1980s. Now, the Canucks in the 1980s had a lot of highs and lows. They made the Stanley Cup final against the Islanders in the early 80s, failed to win a game, but still showed well. They had a lot of good prospects and a lot of opportunity, but for some reason, the next level he could have got, and anything was possible back then with the western side of the league. They could have easily won a Stanley Cup if they would have done this. Now, in 1980, they decided to take a little bit of pressure off the Toronto Maple Leafs, who were in crisis mode on a regular basis because of Harold Ballard and his hatred for what they call the players under the Maple Leafs. He felt he could control. Ballard traded Lanny McDonald. He alienated Ian Turnbull, alienated Daryl Sittler, and decided, or Vancouver decided, they were going to do this. Tiger Williams, who was basically the kind of, not say goon, but the fire plug, a la kind of a Dave Schultz, Bob Clark style with Toronto, was traded with Jerry Butler, a very marginal player, to the Canucks, or the Canucks were trying to get him to, like I said, give that importance to the team. Vancouver gave up, ladies and gentlemen, Rick Vaive, who ended up being a superstar in Toronto and Chicago, and Billy Derlago, two of the best young prospects of the 1980s. Now, why in the name of Lord Living Jesus would they trade Rick Vaive, who was a baby bull in the WHA, a great potential of a player, and Billy Derlago, who was easily a 30-goal guy potential, for somebody like Tiger Williams, because he was a one-note player. Now, Rick Vaive arguably is the greatest player ever to come from Prince Edward Island. He played a whole bunch of great minor league and Q league years before he hooked up with the Bulls. With Sherbrooke, he scored 127 goals in about as many games, and in Birmingham he had 59 points before he ended up in Vancouver. Now, his first half a season in Vancouver, he got 13 goals in 47 games before the trade. But, ladies and gentlemen, he never gave Rick Vaive a chance. And when Rick Vaive came to Toronto, a team that really needed him after alienating and getting rid of all those players of the early 70s, mid 70s, when he started playing in a line with Derlago and Hickey, Rick Vaive scored in four consecutive seasons with Toronto, 33, 54, 51, and 52. He was comparable to an Alexander Ovechkin for a great shot, getting the puck in the net, puck back to Twine. So it's a story. This trade was a story of two things. If Vaive and Derlago would have stayed with Vancouver, and if Toronto would have got somebody else for Tiger Williams, could have been draft picks. They needed a goalie because Palmentier was basically, again, run out of town. If Tiger Williams would have been traded for something less, Vancouver could have easily been a strong contender to Edmonton for that new era of the Canadian teams of great success. Now, the argument here is if Toronto would have kept all their players, McDonald's, Williams, and all that, 2 or 3 years, you would need somebody like a Vaive and Derlago. So they could have traded somebody else for Vaive and Derlago. There was a lot of good young players coming up in the system, some third or fourth line players. But to give up marquee for marquee, it's a big risk because you don't know if the revenue or the what they call the quality will leave your team or will be added to your team. But with all the bad trades for Toronto, trading Lanny McDonald for that crackpot Wilt Pema, who basically never reached a potential. He always played with losing teams. Daryl Sittler just been traded, left go for a bag of pucks. Palmentier being left go for basically nothing. So, but was this a good trade for Toronto or a bad trade for Vancouver? I'll let you decide. There's a lot of YouTube and videos and texts on the trades. But all I know, Rick Vaive, when he was with Toronto, he took a lot of burden on himself. Now you look at the fact that later on when Clark was added to the team, so you see where I'm coming from here. Toronto, Harold Ballard was there to control the team. He didn't like anybody talking back. He traded or got rid of or alienated all these players. If he would have kept them, that's at least one Stanley Cup for Toronto. And I basically tell a lot of people in 2020 with Austin Matthews and Tavares, they say he could win the cup. Well, I said he had a good opportunity if he would have played it right in the early 80s to either contend. Because you got to remember the late 70s, they were winning 4 games of reaching the Stanley Cup final against Montreal. And to beat Montreal back then, Boston could beat them on a regular basis. You got to have a match for match. Toronto was 3 players away from a Stanley Cup. And he brought 2 of those players in like Vaive and Derlago, but he let another 5 go or alienated another 5. It's bad enough to have a player injured or traded, but when you alienated a player, and Harold Ballard, maybe if Ann Murray would have bought the Toronto Maple Leafs, that's the story that came up again. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Ann Murray offered money, cash in the line, to Harold Ballard to buy the Leafs, but it never worked out. He wanted $100 million, and Ann was only going to give 40 with her conglomerate. So, anyway, Vancouver Canucks of the 80s were like Toronto of the early 80s. They were very you can't just go all in all the time. You have to have a better way. Montreal had bad drafts. Montreal had bad trades. That's another example we've talked about in previous podcasts. But the second part of the series will be the Cam Neely deal. Vancouver getting rid of Cam Neely. Again, the Vaive trade was bad enough, but the Cam Neely trade is beyond because it bolstered Boston towards the Stanley Cup Finals for years, and it destroyed any potential of Vancouver competing with Edmonton and the other marquee teams in the West, including Calgary. So on this beautiful February day, waiting for another mini storm to come into Brunswick. Keep your stick to the ice. Oscars are tonight, and I make a bold prediction. Somebody will mispronounce a name of a winner tonight. Rick Vaive or something like that. Anyway.